Hey friends, tonight, let's explore why cats, especially the black, slinky late-night prowlers, were once considered more than just rodent hunters. You might think your modern tabby is mystical when it stares into the corner for 20 minutes straight. But in the medieval world, that behavior could get you canonized or burned. There really was no middle ground. So before you relax, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share. And if you're listening from somewhere peaceful and cat-approved, like a sun-warmed windowsill in Florence or a cozy bed in Fresno, drop your local time and location in the comments. I'd love to know when and where we're dreaming together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking through the stone corridors of a 12th century abbey. The air smells faintly of beeswax parchment and baked barley bread, with just a hint of incense that clings to everything like a polite ghost. Your sandals whisper against the cold flagstones. A candle flickers in your hand, your only light, unless you count the silver glow of the full moon that spills across the cloisters like divine milk. And then a sound. Soft, crisp, purposeful, tiny claws on stone. You stop. You turn. And out of the shadows glides a cat. Not just any cat, but a black one with fur so sleek it reflects the candlelight like armor. It doesn't meow. It doesn't blink. It stares at you with golden eyes that clearly know more than you do. Maybe more than the local bishop, honestly. This is not a pet. This is a creature of mystery, of magic, and of midnight. In medieval Europe, cats, particularly black ones, had a complicated resume. On one hand, they were essential in monasteries and manors for controlling vermin. Grain stores stayed safe thanks to cats. In fact, many religious institutions kept a resident mouser, often unofficially named Brother Whiskers or Sister Pounce. No joke. But on the other hand, they were sometimes seen as connected to the supernatural agents of witches, messengers of spirits, or even shape-shifting demons in disguise. You know, casual stuff. Tonight's historical fact is this: in numerous medieval texts and sermons, cats were described as creatures of the night whose silence hides secrets. They were believed to see in the dark, both literally and metaphorically able to witness things invisible to the human eye-sin spirits and most terrifying of all other people's opinions. But let's be fair, cats didn't ask for this PR campaign. They just wanted to catch mice sleep in sunbeams and occasionally knock over a goblet of wine for absolutely no reason. Which, to be honest, still feels pretty magical. As you continue your candlelit walk, the abbey seems to hold its breath. The cat now walks ahead of you, leading you toward the scriptorium, where monks copy holy texts by hand. And there, beside an open manuscript, is a smear of ink and a paw print. This wasn't rare. Surviving medieval manuscripts with cat paw prints are oddly numerous. One famous 15th century example shows clear evidence of a feline stepping across wet ink, possibly out of boredom, possibly out of divine inspiration. Historians have debated whether this suggests cats were beloved companions of scholars or just really bad at respecting personal space. One scholar posits that the presence of cats in these sacred spaces reflects a quiet tension between folklore and theology. Another counters that cats were simply too useful to ban, regardless of what people whispered after dark. You pause near a wooden bench, running your hand across its worn surface. The cat leaps onto the bench beside you, purring softly a sound that feels like velvet mixed with old secrets. Here's your curious detail of the night in certain corners of Europe, especially in Welsh and Irish folklore. Cats were believed to guard gateways between worlds. A cat found waiting at a crossroads or sleeping beside a grave might not be mere coincidence, it might be on duty. So next time your cat stares at an empty hallway like it owes it rent, maybe just light a candle and hope for the best. A gentle breeze stirs through the Abbey's open window. The candle flickers. The cat stretches luxuriously, then vanishes behind a tapestry without a sound. Of course it does. Your eyes grow heavier now. The stone beneath you has warmed slightly from your presence. Somewhere, another bell chimes the midnight hour. A distant owl calls, and you feel not afraid, but watched in the kindest possible way. Let's be honest, if you were a mouse, this would be terrifying. But you're not. You're safe. And the cat, it's probably off judging some candles, or astral projecting into someone's dreams. 3 parting thoughts before you drift off. If a cat knocks something off a table in the dark, and no one's there to hear it, is it still spiteful? Yes. In the 1300s, some villages held funerals for cats that caught 7 rats in a week. Honestly, that's more recognition than most kings got. Monks may have copied the Bible by hand, but cats added the punctuation. Often in claw marks, sleep well. And if you hear quiet paw steps tonight, it's probably nothing. Nine lives and a half. You're lying on a straw mattress that creaks like it's been through 3 plagues in a wedding. The room smells faintly of candle smoke, damp stone, and yes, cat fur. There's a gentle rumble beside you, soft and rhythmic, like a lullaby in Morse code. That's not your heartbeat. That's a cat purring. You roll over slightly, and there it is, curled up like a warm comma at the end of your life sentence. Its ears twitch, its whiskers bristle, and it's absolutely judging your posture. But more than that, it's surviving. Because cats, as any medieval peasant, would tell you, simply refuse to die. Your historical fact, tonight in several regions of medieval Europe, particularly in England and parts of France, cats were believed to have 9 lives. That number wasn't just poetic, it was practical folklore. People genuinely thought cats were near impossible to kill. They'd fall from rooftops and land on all 4s. They'd disappear for a week and reappear with a bird and no explanation. They'd survive floods, fires, and the occasional accidental toss from the bell tower. We do not condone bell tower experiments. And where does the half come from? You ask. Well, that's the curious bit. Some folk legends added that the 9th life wasn't quite whole. It was a flickering shadow of the cat's former self, slower, quieter, but still watching, like the feline version of retirement. That's why, if an old cat showed up limping into a village, it hadn't been seen in years, people would whisper, "Ah, he's on his half-life now." Now, you're walking through a village green, under pale morning mist. There's a cluster of children gathered around something. You approach. It's a one-eyed, 3-legged, probably part-time sorcerer of a cat, and the kids are feeding it bread, soaked in goat milk, and whispering their secrets. To the modern mind, that seems sweet. To the medieval mind, it's insurance. Because if a cat lived that long, clearly it had power. And maybe it could pass some of it on. Of course, not all tales were so gentle. One folk account from northern Italy tells of a cat named Belladonna, who survived 8 separate fires. and on the ninth walked out carrying someone's rosary beads in her mouth. Superstition? Absolutely. Coincidence? Also, yes. But did that stop the villagers from building a shrine in her honor? Of course not. There's still a painting of her in the back room of a crumbling chapel, possibly next to a pile of burnt furniture. But this wasn't just European thinking. Across the Islamic world, cats were admired for their resilience and cleanliness. The Prophet Muhammad himself was said to favor cats, and there are stories of him cutting off his robe rather than disturbing a cat sleeping on it. In that context, a cat's multiple lives were seen not as witchcraft, but as grace. Back in your village, you're invited into the cottage of an elderly widow. She has 7 cats. And yes, she knows exactly how many lives each one has left. That one 4 lives. Used one falling from the barn, another during the grain fire, and one more last winter when he bit the bishop. She says it with the calm authority of someone who's seen more than just bad harvests. Your odd detail of the night. There's a surviving 13th century poem, written entirely from the perspective of a cat bragging about its lives. It ends with the line loosely translated, "I sleep in shadow, dine in silence, and return when no one calls me. Try to bury me, I will outlast the dirt." That's either confidence or a threat, possibly both. But here's where scholars quietly wrestle. Some argue the 9 lives idea came from ancient Egyptian beliefs, where cats were linked to immortality and rebirth. Others say it's pure medieval mischief, the result of too many superstitious farmers and one too many miraculous feline reappearances. And then there's the theory that 9 was simply a complete number symbolically, so of course cats got it. Dogs got fleas. Cats got numerology. You're sitting now on a wooden stool outside the widow's cottage. The sky is turning from lavender to gold. One of her cats climbs into your lap. It's missing, an ear has a scar across its nose, and purrs like a broken drum. You ask how many lives it has left. She chuckles, "Just one," but he borrows from the others. You stay like that for a while, breathing in the quiet, feeling the warmth, listening to a creature that has dodged death more times than you've dodged chores. And here, as your eyes grow heavy, again are 3 final thoughts. If cats have 9 lives, do they also have 9 beds? Because this one has claimed every surface in the house. Scholars argue about the origin of the myth, but no one argues with a cat who's clearly on life 8.5 and holding. One medieval diary mentions that a village cat survived a siege by sneaking food out of both sides of the battlefield. Technically, a war hero. Sleep well. And remember, if you feel something warm settling on your chest tonight, it's probably just your own magical little guardian. Probably. Cat in the candlelight. You're sitting on the stone floor of a village chapel, the kind with uneven pews, windows made of bottle-bottom glass, and an altar that looks like it was carved by someone who only had half a chisel and a lot of opinions. The air smells of wax moss, and that faint scent old wood gives off after centuries of prayers and questionable confessions. A single candle burns in front of the altar, and beside it sits a cat, not sprawled, not sleeping. Sitting upright, like it paid for the front row seat, and has very specific thoughts about tonight's sermon. Its eyes reflect the candlelight in twin orbs of orange and green. Its tail curls neatly around its paws, and its presence is so silent, so complete, that no one dares disturb it. Welcome to one of the most quietly unnerving moments in medieval village life, when the cat enters the sacred space and stays. Tonight's historical fact: in multiple documented church accounts between the 12th and 14th centuries, cats were known to enter chapels and sit near the altar or pulpit during services and were not removed. Not because they were respected parishioners, but because people feared what might happen if they were. Some believed a cat in a holy place was a sign of blessing. Others weren't so sure. There's a case from the town of Mirepoix in southern France where a cat entered the nave every Wednesday during Vesper prayers, walked up the aisle, sat beside the crucifix, and left precisely when the bells stopped. This continued for months. No one dared to touch it. One villager whispered that it might be an angel. Another claimed it was a soul trapped in feline form. The town priest just kept forgetting his lines. You watch now as the cat in front of you lifts one paw and gently bats at a fleck of wax on the floor. It makes no sound. Then it looks at you, directly, like it knows what you did last Tuesday. You don't even remember what you did last Tuesday. The medieval mind didn't separate the sacred from the symbolic very well. Everything had meaning. Everything pointed to something else. So when a cat stared too long at the altar, people wondered what it saw that they didn't. A ghost, a saint, a sin. That brings us to tonight's odd detail in one preserved ecclesiastical manual from 1274. There's a marginal note that reads, loosely translated, "If a cat crosses the sanctuary during Mass, do not strike it. It may be sent by whom no follow-up. You move to the front pew." It creaks in protest. The cat does not flinch. Instead, it blinks slowly, which in cat language either means I trust you or you have 30 seconds to leave. Medieval folk wouldn't have known the nuance, but they understood authority. And this cat had it. Here's where scholarly debate flickers like a candle in a drafty nave. Some believe the cat's behavior in sacred spaces inspired a type of proto-feline theology, where cats were seen as liminal beings, bridging the earthly and the divine. Others argue it was pure coincidence, mixed with a dash of medieval overreaction. After all, cats liked warmth. Candles were warm. Altars were usually the only warm spot in stone churches. Voila. Religious mystery solved. But try telling that to a 14th century peasant who just saw a cat sit through an entire funeral mass, then leave when the body did. And yes, that happened too. It's written in the parish records of Kent. Let's pause a moment. Outside the chapel, the wind rustles through trees. The candle flame dances. The cat shifts its weight, but doesn't move from its spot. You could almost believe it's listening. Or maybe it's waiting. 3 whispers of humor to lighten your medieval mystery. One chronicler once wrote that a cat sneezed during a bishop's sermon, and half the congregation took it as divine commentary. The bishop did not take questions afterward. In a tiny church in Bohemia, a monk trained his cat to ring the prayer bell at sunrise. It worked too well. The cat began ringing it at midnight for snacks. A papal scribe once blamed a misspelled passage on the distraction of a feline presence most terrible in concentration. Translation: the cat sat on the scroll again. Your candle's getting lower now. The wax pools beside the cat's paws. It doesn't move. You almost don't want it to. There's a comfort in its stillness, in its quiet defiance of chaos, in the way it seems to hold the weight of centuries on soft little shoulders. Maybe it's just a cat. Maybe it's a relic with fur. Either way, You close your eyes. Let the chill of the chapel floor drift away. Let the mystery linger like incense in your thoughts. And if you wake up and the cat's still there staring at the candle, don't worry. It's probably just making sure you're not the suspicious one. The familiar by the fire. You're in a small stone cottage, the kind that's seen more winters than generations. The hearth is the heart of the room, crackling, glowing, hissing, like it knows secrets you don't. The scent of burning oak and dried rosemary curls into the air. And sprawled in front of the fire as if it owns the place, and possibly the land tax ledger, is a cat. Not just any cat. This one has fur the color of coal and storm clouds, one ear nicked like it's seen battle, or a toddler, and eyes the color of candle wax left too long in the sun. You sit on a stool near the warmth. The cat opens one eye. You feel judged, and possibly hexed. Welcome to the medieval idea of the familiar. Tonight's historical fact, from the late 13th century onward, particularly during periods of moral panic and witch-hunting, cats were often listed in confessions, accusations, and grim little pamphlets as familiars or animal companions of witches. Not pets, but spirits, shapeshifters, or demonic assistants who help perform magical acts. And most often, the familiar was a cat. You look over to the old woman tending the fire. She hums softly to herself, stirring something in a cast iron pot. Onion thyme barley, and maybe a pinch of suspicion from the neighbors. Her cloak is patched, her teeth few, and her cat. It hasn't moved in 10 minutes, but you could swear it's still watching you. The idea of a familiar wasn't born from fear of animals. It was born from the fear of unexplained power, especially power wielded by someone poor female or slightly too good with herbs. Cats, being solitary, cunning, and impossible to train, made perfect suspects. They came and went as they pleased, appeared during storms, stared at walls like they saw ghosts, and occasionally, just for fun, stared directly at clergymen without blinking. Medieval people noticed, and they did not appreciate the attitude. In witch trial records from East Anglia, a woman named Agnes was accused because her cat named Sathan reportedly whispered to her in Latin, which seems suspicious but also impressive, especially for a region where most people barely knew English. Another case in Scotland involved a woman whose cat always sat on her shoulder during full moons. Townsfolk said it guided her through rituals. In her defense, she said it just liked the view. The jury was not charmed, and here's your odd detail of the night in a 15th century grimoire found in a French abbey. There's an entire chapter titled Concerning the Attire of the Familiar. It includes an illustration of a cat in a tiny red cloak with a belt pouch. That means someone somewhere took the time to dress their magical cat, or was having an excellent prank day. Scholars debate the origin of this obsession. Some argue it stems from Norse and Celtic beliefs, where cats were sacred, tied to deities like Freya, who rode a chariot pulled by two giant felines. Others say it's a Christian reinterpretation of pagan symbols gone feline. Either way, the poor cat never asked to be mystical. It just wanted a warm spot, and maybe your chicken bones. You reach for your cup. The cat suddenly stands, stretches, and pads over to sit right in front of you. It doesn't meow. It doesn't blink. It just sits. You're being interviewed. Now, if this were a darker story, someone might whisper that if you stroke the cat 3 times, you'll dream of forbidden knowledge. But in this cottage, all you'll get is a lap full of fur and maybe a sneeze. Because not all witches were sinister, and not all familiars were fearsome. Some were just fuzzy. Still, the lines blurred. A bishop once wrote that cats should not be trusted in holy places, for their slinking ways and flickering tails suggest they walk between this world and the next. Someone clearly lost a sermon to a particularly noisy tabby, but there are also gentler records, a convent in southern Germany that kept a white cat named Hildegard. The nuns believed she absorbed their bad dreams. She was fed better than the novices, arguably better than the bishop. And now, as you stare into the fire, the cat jumps into your lap. Heavy, warm, humming with purrs that vibrate into your bones. You feel grounded, safe, slightly under surveillance. Here are your 3 catty chuckles before bed. A 14th century witch confessed under duress that her cat taught her how to find lost spoons, which is honestly more useful than half the nobles of the time. One inquisitor claimed a familiar appeared as a cat wearing shoes. No one asked what kind. A folktale from Wales says if a cat sleeps on your chest, it's either healing your heart or making sure you don't get up again. Flip a coin, the fire crackles. The woman hums. The cat purrs. Outside, the wind sighs through the trees. And inside, you let your eyes fall shut, knowing that if any creature in this house holds arcane power, it's probably the one on your lap. And yes, it will steal your spot if you move. Paw prints in the manuscript. You're seated in a scriptorium, which is just a fancy way of saying a very cold room where monks ruin their eyesight for the glory of God. The air smells like damp parchment lamp oil and sheer determination. Candles flicker in iron sconces. A feather quill scratches slowly across vellum. And somewhere in the distance, someone is coughing the kind of cough that suggests they've memorized half the Psalms out of spite. But here at this desk, under this low archway, something more intriguing has happened. There are paw prints, not metaphorical ones, real ones, ink-stained, and right in the middle of a nearly completed page of sacred text. And not just any text. It's the Gospel of Luke, painstakingly written by hand over the course of 3 weeks by a monk named Oswin, who now looks like he's deciding whether to scream cry or blame the devil. You're not Oswin. You're just watching from the side as he holds the parchment up with trembling fingers and a look of existential betrayal. And beneath the table tail, flicking smugly, sits the culprit, a cat. Tonight's historical fact: multiple surviving medieval manuscripts across different centuries and regions contain literal cat paw prints, often right across the margins, or worse, the main text. And these are not accidents that were corrected. They were left in either as part of the record or because, well, ink and vellum were expensive, and monks didn't always have the energy to start over. One of the most famous examples is a 15th century Croatian manuscript where a cat walked directly across a fresh page of text, leaving a trail of ink. The scribe wrote beside the prints, with commendable patience, "Cursed be the cat who stepped on this." We feel you, brother. The scriptorium isn't built for feline visitors. And yet they always seem to be here. The windows don't quite seal. The doors don't always close. And the warmth of a lit candle in a freezing cloister is irresistible. So cats slipped in, slept on scrolls, knocked over ink pots, walked across divine words like they were sidewalk chalk, and no one could stop them. You lean closer to the page. The paw prints aren't large. They're dainty, almost polite, if one ignores the holy passage they trample across. One even curves slightly mid-stride, like the cat changed direction at the last second, possibly chasing something invisible, possibly just being dramatic. Here's your odd detail of the night. In one illuminated manuscript from northern Italy, a monk responded to a cat's mischief by drawing a tiny illustrated mouse in the margin, being chased by the paw prints. The note beneath reads loosely translated, "If you must ruin it, at least make it art." Some scholars argue this shows the surprisingly flexible relationship monks had with their environment. Despite the rigid discipline of monastic life, there were moments like this where annoyance gave way to humor, or at least resignation. Others suggest that cats were tolerated, even valued in scriptoria, not only for rodent control, but also as spiritual symbols. In some medieval bestiaries, cats represented vigilance because of their night vision, and contemplation because of how often they seemed to just sit there, staring into nothing like little bearded sages with whiskers. But more than that, they were present, real, immediate. In a world of saints and martyrs, of visions and divine mysteries, a cat stepping on your Bible draft was almost comforting. At least you knew something in the room wasn't imaginary. A gust of wind flutters the parchment. The candle flickers. The cat, unfazed, jumps onto the writing bench and begins grooming itself with the kind of nonchalance that borders on blasphemy. Brother Oswin watches with the expression of a man who has considered leaving the church to become a shepherd. A quiet life. With no manuscripts, you move to a nearby shelf. Ancient books line the wood, their bindings crack, their letters painstakingly drawn with red ink and gold leaf. And yet here and there, a paw print mars the order. A tiny mark of rebellion, or collaboration, depending on how you frame it. 3 facts to help you drift off with a smile. In a monastery in Ireland, a cat once stole a monk's sandwich during Lent and was later depicted in the margin of his book wearing a tiny halo, probably sarcastic. One monk added in Latin, "I do not remember this sentence." The cat leapt upon me, and all was chaos. Possibly the earliest recorded work excuse involving a cat. A few manuscripts have smudges not from paws, but from tails dipped in ink. So yes, tail calligraphy existed. Accidentally. The room dims. The candles burn low. The cat, satisfied, curls into a small circle of warmth atop a pile of unused parchment. Brother Oswin sighs, picks up his quill, and begins again, not at the start, but just after the last paw print. Because even in the sacred life goes on. Even if it's tracked in with tiny feet, you close your eyes. The soft scratch of the quill, the gentle purr by the fire, and the memory of inked mischief accompany your slow descent into sleep. If you dream of words tonight, may none of them be stepped on. The church and the cat. You're sitting in the back pew of a small country church. Stone walls, thick with aged wooden beams, blackened by candle smoke, and windows so cloudy they diffuse the sunlight into a soft, sleepy glow. The sermon has been going for what feels like half a century, and the priest is somewhere between a warning about vanity and an anecdote involving fish. You've stopped listening, because just beneath the altar, sitting like it owns the place, is a cat. It's Ginger. One ear flopped, tail twitching slowly, like it's conducting the choir in its head. And it is clearly, undeniably not supposed to be here, but no one moves it. Tonight's historical fact: while the medieval church often condemned cats, especially black ones, as agents of witchcraft or symbols of paganism, they were also quietly tolerated and sometimes even adored within monastic and parish life. It was a complicated relationship, like trying to excommunicate someone who keeps your food safe from rats. Official doctrine, especially by the 13th century, leaned strongly anti-feline. Papal decrees condemned associations between cats and diabolical practices. Black cats, in particular, were seen as shape-shifted demons, familiars, or worse, independent thinkers. And you know how dangerous those were. But then, there's Brother Felix, a quiet Benedictine monk in the region of Burgundy who wrote an entire series of marginal notes about his monastery's resident cat, Thibaut. Thibaut slept on the psalms, kept warm the spare sandals, and was said to attend matins more faithfully than half the novices. There's even a doodle of Thibaut curled around a candle holder with the caption, "Luminary Feline Guardian of the Word." So what gives? The church's stance on cats was often more political than theological. During the height of witch-hunting fervor, cats were guilted by association. Female herbalists, probably witches. Cats followed them. Case closed. Add a few natural feline quirks, like staring into nothing for hours, or bringing offerings of dead birds, and suddenly you've got a heretic on 4 legs. But not all clergy followed this logic. In fact, there's a wonderfully strange detail in some cathedral accounts. High-ranking clergy kept cats under their vestments, especially during winter, to stay warm during long services. This wasn't publicized for obvious reasons, but let's just say some mysterious bumps under robes were not always divine intervention. Your odd historical tidbit tonight: in a 14th century abbey in Saxony, a cat named Clarissimus was given an unofficial burial in the monastery garden. A small stone was placed over the grave, reading "Only faithful keeper of the hours." He had reportedly meowed precisely at the beginning of lauds for nearly a decade. Better than most alarm bells. Of course, some clergy remained suspicious. One notorious bishop banned all cats from his church grounds after claiming a feline stared at him with knowing contempt during confession. Honestly, relatable. But the most confusing aspect for historians is this: despite official church warnings, cats continue to appear in sacred art marginalia and even satirical poems written by monks. One poem describes the author's cat as more disciplined than the abbot and twice as effective at silencing rodents and sermons alike. You're standing now near the church doors. Outside, wind rustles the hedgerow. Inside, the priest has moved on to the dangers of vanity again. The cat, meanwhile, has climbed onto the altar. It is cleaning its paw, thoroughly, and no one stops it, because secretly, or perhaps not so secretly, many medieval clergy admired the cat's aloof devotion, its serene disinterest in worldly matters, and its insistence on sleeping exactly where it shouldn't. All very monastic, really. Here come your 3 soft chuckles to close the Vesper hour. A monk once wrote that his cat was the only one in the abbey who genuinely understood silence. That monk later founded a meditation order. Probably coincidence. One abbot claimed cats were prideful, smug, and always in the way. He was later buried with 3 of them. There's a stained glass window in a small Flemish chapel that includes a cat curled at the Virgin Mary's feet. The local legend: she asked for it. The sermon ends. The priest coughs. The congregation begins to shuffle out. You linger for a moment longer, watching as the cat stretches luxuriously across the altar cloth. And you wonder, was that really defiance, or just perfect timing? Your eyes begin to drift as the chapel fades into quiet. The stone floor, the heavy wooden doors, the echo of footsteps slowly departing. Only the cat remains, blinking slowly, like a sentinel watching over holy things, and the occasional unattended loaf of bread. Sleep peacefully. And if you dream tonight of churches and candlelight, don't be surprised if a tail flicks past the pew. Whiskers at the witch's trial. You're standing in a cold village square, and it smells like wet wool, wood smoke, and tension. The kind of tension that gathers in whispers. People are crammed together like bundles of firewood, all facing a wooden platform where something serious and thoroughly uncomfortable is about to happen. At the center of it all is a woman in rough linen robes. Her hands are bound, her eyes calm, and beside her, on a fraying leash, is a cat. It's not hiding. It's not yowling. It's perched beside her like it's attending a play. Its tail flicks once, twice, and the crowd inhales sharply because everyone knows that cat is trouble. Tonight's historical fact: during the late medieval and early modern periods, particularly in the height of the witch trial era, roughly 1450 to 1700 cats were frequently named in witchcraft accusations, not as passive pets, but as active participants, familiars, spies, demons in disguise, or even witches themselves in transformed form. And often, their presence was enough to tip suspicion into condemnation. You're watching as the village scribe reads the charges aloud. The language is formal heavy and embroidered with phrases like unnatural knowledge and shadowborn companions. The accused. She stands quietly, the cat still licking its paw like it's heard it all before. A murmur spreads through the crowd. Someone claims the cat has green eyes, and that green is the color of envy or worse, sorcery. Another points out it hasn't blinked in a while. Someone in the back swears they saw it talk once, which seems unlikely, but try disproving it in a century without video evidence. The idea of the witch's familiar wasn't just folklore, it was legal evidence. Trial records across England, France, Germany, and the Low Countries include statements like the accused did consort with a creature in the likeness of a cat, which did suckle at her person and speak in dreams. That last part refers to a belief that cats nourish themselves from the witch's blood, usually from a hidden mark, and in exchange served her bidding. Think of it as a very strange medieval subscription service. Your odd detail of the night in the infamous 1566 Chelmsford witch trials in England, a woman named Elizabeth Francis confessed under interrogation that her cat named Sathan, yes spelled just like that was given to her by her grandmother, and instructed her in the dark arts. She claimed the cat once demanded a drop of blood, and in return made her a handsome man for a husband. The cat was later executed. Yes, the cat was executed. You're now sitting at the edge of the crowd, half shielded by a thatched eave. The wind tugs at your cloak. The cat on the platform yawns. And despite the fear in the air, it exudes that typical feline aura of none of this is my problem, which ironically makes everyone more suspicious. Some scholars argue that this cat panic was part of a wider backlash against pagan traditions, where animals, especially cats, had been sacred or symbolic. Others suggest it was misogyny, with fur attached, since many accused witches were women, and many women kept cats. The connection was guilt by association. Convenient, if nothing else. And of course, there's the image problem. Cats are nocturnal, independent, silent. And unlike dogs, they don't follow orders or grovel for approval, which in a control, obsessed society made them deeply unnerving. Back to the trial. A child is brought forward to testify. He claims the cat once walked backward and disappeared. A murmur of horror ripples through the crowd You want to ask, how else are cats supposed to leave with a flourish? No one laughs. Here are your 3 whispered, slightly absurd truths for tonight. One witch trial claimed the familiar cat wore a small black hat and whispered secrets about weather. The hat was not recovered. In parts of Scotland, villagers believed that if a cat crossed your threshold during a trial, the accused was innocent. Cats were bribed with meat for years. A Flemish inquisitor once tried to torture a cat into confession. Its scratched him escaped and was declared supernaturally evasive, or just a cat. The trial ends as the priest raises his hand in benediction, or maybe judgment. The cat slips behind the accused's skirt. Some swear it vanished into shadow. Others swear it leapt onto a nearby roof and winked. No one agrees, which is exactly what the cat wanted. You stand up, brushing dust from your knees. The villagers begin to disperse. The wind quiets, and the platform sits empty, the rope swinging gently like an unfinished sentence. Later, in a quiet house at the edge of the village, the cat is seen curled in the window, watching the moon rise. Whether it's a demon, a familiar, or just someone's very confused tabby, no one dares knock. Sleep now wrapped in warmth. And if you hear something pawing at the door tonight, you may want to leave it shut, or at least offer it something to eat. Market day and the cat tax. You're walking down a muddy road, lined with carts, crates, and people who have already been up for 6 hours and are still somehow behind schedule. This is market day, and everything smells vividly. There's hot bread, damp wool, boiled cabbage, horse sweat, and something that might be cheese, but also might be a cry for help. Welcome to the medieval town square. You're not here to buy turnips or haggle over eels. You're here because something peculiar is happening near the toll booth. A man in a wide-brimmed hat is arguing loudly with a tax clerk. Beside him sits a wooden crate. Inside the crate is a cat. The cat is napping. The argument is not. Tonight's historical fact in certain towns across medieval Europe, especially those with structured guilds and regulated trade days, cats were taxed. Not just as property, but in some cases as luxury animals, working animals, or in truly strange instances, magical risks. How much you owed could depend on how many cats you brought, what color they were, and allegedly how intelligent they looked. You inch closer to the scene. The man is gesturing wildly. The tax clerk, unimpressed, flips a page in his ledger. 2 coppers for 1 cat. 3 if it's black. The man points at the cat. She's gray. The clerk squints with suspicious undertones. That's right. Black cats were taxed higher in some places due to their association with witchcraft or bad luck, because nothing says justice like charging extra for natural pigment. But wait, it gets better. In the town of Wismar, in 14th century Germany, cats brought into the marketplace had to wear tiny collars with tokens indicating their owner had paid the beast fee. If a cat was caught wandering collarless, it could be confiscated and in some cases put to work chasing rats in the town granary. Think of it as medieval community service for cats who definitely never agreed to any of it. Your odd detail of the night one surviving guild document from Bruges includes a note that says, if a cat is proven to be acting on its own business and not that of a trader, no toll is owed, which implies someone somewhere was cross-examining cats about their errands. You're now standing beside a fish stall. A cat with 1 ear and half a tail is doing its best impression of just an innocent bystander as it slowly edges toward a basket of herring. The vendor doesn't swat it away. He tosses it a scrap. Why? Because some cats were considered protected. In certain markets, cats were official employees. Their job was rodent control, and if you harmed one, you could be fined. In Avignon, there are records of cat keepers who were paid in fish heads and crusty bread to ensure their feline friends stayed active and visible on market day. A lazy cat could get you reprimanded. A good mouser worth their whiskers and silver. But here's where the scholars get tangled. Was the cat tax meant as regulation, superstition, or pure bureaucratic boredom? Some believe it reflected class divisions. Rich folk had fancy cats. Poor folk had none, and the town wanted a cut. Others think it was just part of the wider trend of taxing anything that moved, or sat, or meowed. Now you're watching a young girl pay a copper to carry her cat past the gate. The cat is wearing a ribbon. The clerk nods solemnly, like this is perfectly reasonable behavior, and not, say, a surreal fever dream involving feline tariffs. 3 musings before your mind begins to drift. One Parisian record lists a black cat surcharge during All Hallows Week. But if your cat performed a trick, the fee was waived. So yes, medieval cat busking was a thing. In Prague, a baker claimed his cats counted as employees. He paid them in fish and insisted they qualified for feast day bonuses. A tax collector in Bruges reportedly had a personal vendetta against cats and was once found yelling at a tabby perched on his records. The cat remained unfazed. As the sun begins to lower and market stalls start packing up, the cat tax line dwindles. The ginger Tom from earlier has vanished crate and all possibly into the back alley, possibly into legend. You stroll past the remaining stalls, the echo of bells and laughter fading into the distance. You pass a final booth, unmanned now. A cat sits on top tail, curled, blinking slowly at you, like it's reviewing your audit history. You nod respectfully. It does not nod back. Sleep now, traveler of strange trades. And if you dream of tolls, tonight may none of them involve exact change and a suspicious-looking tabby. The cat who predicted rain. You're sitting in the corner of a candlelit tavern, tucked between the hearth and a barrel that smells suspiciously like regret. The ceiling is low, the floor is damp, and the table is sticky, but the mead is warm, the bread is passable, and the entertainment is a cat, not juggling, not singing, not telling fortunes with tiny cards, just sitting. But every time the cat sneezes, someone gets up and goes to fetch their cloak. Because in this village, when the cat sneezes, it rains. Tonight's historical fact across medieval Europe, there were numerous folk beliefs linking the behavior of cats to changes in weather. If a cat washed behind its ears, it meant rain. If it turned its back to the fire, a cold snap was coming. If it was restless, a storm was near. And if it ran around like a maniac in the middle of the night, well, that might still just be cat stuff. But the belief that cats could predict the weather wasn't just a rural wives' tale. It made it into almanac sermons and even early scientific treatises. After all, before radar satellites or even decent windows, villagers had to rely on what they could see. And cats were observant, sensitive, and let's be honest, deeply dramatic. You glance across the tavern. The cat known locally as Mistress Nimbus is perched on a beam overhead. Her eyes are half lidded. Her fur fluffs slightly. The tavern keeper pauses mid-pour. If she twitches twice, he mutters, "I'm bringing in the laundry." No one laughs. They all just watch. Here's where it gets strange. In a 14th century English household guide, there's an entire chapter titled On Observing the Cat for Wind and Rain. It recommends keeping a journal of the household cat's grooming patterns to anticipate foul weather. One entry reads, "The cat did stretch thrice, turn widdershins, and stare most gravely at the hearth. I kept the sheep home that day." And rightly so. Of course, not all cats cooperated. Some, like Mistress Nimbus, reveled in the power. She'll sneeze into silence, then blink slowly as half the village rearranges its day. Your odd detail tonight in an Italian monastery, monks reportedly tied tiny colored ribbons to their cat's tail to track its weather readings. Blue for storms, red for sun, yellow for snow. The cat eventually chewed all of them off, which the abbot recorded as a prophecy of unpredictability. Back in the tavern, someone brings the cat a scrap of sausage. She sniffs it, sneezes, and immediately half the room bolts for the door. You stay seated, curious, calm, cat adjacent. Scholars have debated this phenomenon for years. Was it just coincidence? Or were cats genuinely more sensitive to shifts in air pressure, humidity, and temperature? Modern science says yes, cats do detect environmental changes before humans do. But medieval villagers didn't need a laboratory to figure that out. They just watched, listened, and took note every time their cat hid in the cupboard hours before a storm. You're offered a stool nearer the fire. The tavern keeper shrugs. She hates sitting by the hearth when there's thunder coming. And last week, she wouldn't even come indoors. 2 days later, hail. He looks upward, then adds, "We trust her more than the priest." Which, to be fair, is probably because the priest forgot to bring in his laundry that day. 3 pawfuls of fun before your eyelids droop. A noble in Brittany kept a weather cat in a tower and claimed she could predict wind direction, by which window she scratched first. The cat refused to be consistent. Classic. A Danish fishing village had a rule no sailing if the dock cat sat facing inland. It saved them from at least 1 notable shipwreck and 2 boring market days. A German baker once swore his cat could predict thunder. The cat, however, mostly used that skill to hide in the flour sacks. As the evening deepens, Mistress Nimbus descends from her perch with the elegance of a queen and the attitude of a very tired oracle. She strolls across the tavern, tail flicking like a feathered quill, and curls up beside your boot. The fire crackles. The rain starts light at first, then steady. No one is surprised. A few nod respectfully toward the cat. One leaves a bowl of cream. You swear you see her smirk. You lean back the stone behind you, warmed by the fire. The sounds of raindrops on thatched roofs above. The cat purrs softly, not loud, just enough to let you know she was right. Again, sleep now under the careful watch of nature's quietest barometer. And if you wake to thunder tonight, don't blame the sky. Blame the cat. She did try to warn you. Silent guardian of the Granary, you're standing in a vast stone barn on the edge of a medieval village where the air smells like dry oats, hay dust, and old superstition. The rafters are high crisscrossed with spider webs that seem more like decorations than pest control. Somewhere above a pigeon coos, in defiance of architectural logic. And in the center of the room, grain, grain in sacks, grain in bins, grain under lock and key, grain that if it were gold would make this building the treasury. Because in this world grain is gold, and guarding it all perched quietly atop a beam, fur blending into shadow eyes like slits of warning, is a cat. It doesn't move. It doesn't need to. Everyone already knows, don't mess with the grain cat. Tonight's historical fact: in many medieval towns and manors, especially in agricultural regions, cats were considered official protectors of the grain supply. They weren't just tolerated, they were essential. Some estates had records listing cats as working animals, and fines existed for anyone who harmed, disturbed, or removed one from its post. You shift your weight on the creaky floorboards. The cat's head turns slowly, watching you with the intensity of a customs inspector who knows you've got cheese in your satchel. For a moment, you wonder if this feline has a title. Something like Mouse Warden General. In certain grain houses, cats were given names, feeding stations, and even ceremonial collars, sometimes made of worn leather with a scrap of copper. This wasn't luxury. It was recognition. The cat didn't belong to anyone. It belonged to the Granary. One estate record from Lincolnshire lists a cat named Grizzle, who slew 34 rats in a fortnight and was to be honored with a herring on the feast of St. Bede, which frankly is better than most employee reward programs. But why the reverence? Because grain theft wasn't just an annoyance, it was a threat to survival. Rats could ruin an entire season's worth of food. So could mold, damp, or bad luck. But rodents. You could fight rodents. And cats were the front line. Your odd detail of the night in Bruges, a town ordinance from the 1400s, required 2 cats per granary, with replacements secured within 5 days if one went missing. Failure to comply could result in loss of trading rights for the merchant in charge. Imagine explaining that to your landlord. Yes, we lost our license to sell because Gregory the tabby took early retirement. You walk now between towering bins of barley and rye. The cat above you shifts just slightly. There's a scuffle in the rafters, then a squeak, then silence. Justice has been served. Scholars argue that this level of respect for cats wasn't purely practical. In some regions, cats took on an almost mystical status within the granary. It wasn't just that they killed pests, it was that they knew when danger approached. Bad omens, sickness in the grain, sometimes even impending famine. There's a Welsh legend of a cat named Lynn who refused to enter the granary for 3 days straight. On the 4th day, the grain bins were found to be full of mold. To this day, locals say if the cat turns away from the storehouse, the harvest will sour. Which, to be fair, might just mean the cat smelled something weird and decided not to get involved. Back in your barn, a farmhand enters with a bucket of scraps. He places a bowl in the corner, nods to the rafters, and backs out quietly. The cat doesn't descend. It will eat later, when no one's watching. Here are your 3 perfectly medieval morsels of amusement. One noble estate reportedly awarded its granary cat a silver charm in the shape of a mouse. The cat lost it in a drainage ditch 2 hours later. In a German village, it was believed that if the grain cat slept outside the barn, thieves were near. If it slept inside the grain sack, good luck getting it out. A scribe once noted, "The cats guard the grain better than the hired lads, and with fewer complaints about mealtime." The wind picks up outside, rattling the barn door. Dust swirls in little golden spirals. The cat, still poised above, closes its eyes and melts into the shadows like it was never there. You sit on a sack of wheat. listening to the old wood creak and settle. The scent of stored harvest surrounds you. Somewhere far off, an owl calls. But here, in this place, nothing stirs without permission, not while the guardian watches. Sleep now, under the silent gaze of grain and guardian. And if you dream of golden fields, may you also dream of a whiskered sentinel keeping watch from the rafters. You're standing in a candlelit chapel, the kind that smells like incense-cold limestone and centuries of whispered prayers. The walls are lined with sacred images, painted panels, faded frescoes, gilded icons, all of them filled with halos, miracles, and elongated fingers pointing toward heaven. And they're quietly tucked in the bottom corner of a triptych just beneath the feet of St. Jerome is a cat, not a lion, not a lamb. A regular-sized, distinctly unimpressed house cat. It's not even doing anything particularly holy. It's curled up asleep, right next to a spilled inkwell and a rather judgmental cherub. Tonight's historical fact: while cats were rarely the focus of religious art in medieval Europe, they do appear in sacred paintings, often in subtle background roles. Sometimes they represent domestic life, other times symbolic meaning, and sometimes no one really knows why, which only makes them more fascinating. You tilt your head to get a better look. The cat in this panel has stripes. One paw dangles slightly over the edge of a book. There's something so casual, so alive about it, that it almost feels like a little joke hidden beneath layers of devotion. The artist probably did it on purpose. In fact, in several medieval manuscript illuminations, those gorgeously decorated margins that look like someone tried to wallpaper scripture with imagination, you'll find cats chasing mice across the page, curled in monk's laps, or staring blankly at nothing. And yes, sometimes they're upside down. One famous English psalter from the 14th century includes a page where a monk is copying a sacred verse, while a cat sits squarely on the manuscript. The monk's marginal note reads, "He hath interrupted my work again." Relatable. Scholars have long debated the presence of these cats. Were they symbolic, decorative, accidental self-inserts by monks who had simply given up on control? Some argue that cats represented watchfulness, or even wisdom, attributes admired in contemplative religious life. Others suggest they stood in for the quiet, comforting presence of the monastic world. Still others think it was just a kind of visual sigh, a little humanity scribbled into the holy. Your odd detail of the night in a 15th century altarpiece from Florence, a cat appears curled beneath the table at the Last Supper. It's not mentioned in any gospel, obviously, but there it is, lurking near the bread basket with the exact expression of a creature contemplating betrayal or crumbs. You sit now on a creaky wooden pew. A priest walks by, nods politely. He doesn't notice the little carved cat at the base of the pulpit, or the embroidered feline on the corner of the altar cloth, but you do. And suddenly, you wonder how many cats have been quietly woven into sacred spaces, watching silently from the margins, while saints and sinners took center stage. The church never officially declared cats sacred, but they never quite managed to keep them out either. Here's something lovely in the writings of Saint Gertrude of Nivelles, a 7th century abbess, sometimes considered the unofficial patron saint of cats. There are references to her fondness for animals, particularly those that kept monasteries clean and cozy. Over time, legends grew, prayers were whispered, and suddenly cats had a quiet little shrine of their own. Not bad for a species that regularly knocks over candles. 3 saintly snickers before you drift into stillness. One monk illustrated the Virgin Mary with a haloed cat at her feet, claiming it was a comfort to the child. The bishop made him redo the panel. The cat reappeared smaller on the windowsill. A poorly restored fresco in a French chapel turned a sleeping lamb into what now looks suspiciously like a smug ginger tabby. Locals call it St. Paws. In some illuminated manuscripts, mice and cats are locked in combat across the margins, while the main text preaches peace. Irony, probably intentional. The candles are burning lower now. Shadows lengthen. A breeze slips through a crack in the stone, rustling the corner of a tapestry that you now notice features a cat curled beside a chalice. Was it part of the design? Or did someone add it later just because? Does it matter? You lean back, eyes growing heavy. In the flicker of light, the painted feline beneath St. Jerome almost seems to twitch its tail. You know it doesn't. But still, sleep now surrounded by saints and soft-pawed intruders. And if you dream of holy halls tonight, may there always be a little cat curled somewhere just out of frame. Tale of the Plague. You're walking through a narrow alleyway, lined with shuttered windows, and the kind of silence that feels loud. The air smells like vinegar-old cloth, and something sharp beneath it all fear. A bell tolls faintly in the distance, slow and hollow. It's not marking the hour. It's marking a death. This is a town in the grip of plague, and in the flickering shadows of the alley, something darts past your feet, quick, low, silent. A cat. You stop. Watch. It disappears into a doorway left ajar. No one follows it. Tonight's historical fact: during outbreaks of the Black Death in the 14th century, cats were both blamed and revered often at the same time. In some towns, they were killed en masse, suspected of spreading the disease. In others, they were kept close, relied upon to catch the rats that truly were spreading it. The irony: the more cats you killed, the worse the rat problem got. So yes, some towns in fear-fueled logic destroyed their best line of defense. Others, by sheer stubborn affection or practical need, let their cats live and fared better. A few records even show towns importing cats from neighboring areas. One French mayor reportedly said, "Let them come with claws and tails. Better that than funerals." You're now inside a cramped apothecary shop. Bundles of herbs hang from the beams. There's garlic, rosemary, angelica root, all the greatest hits of medieval medicine. In the corner, nestled beneath a sack of dried yarrow, sleeps a tabby cat. She doesn't stir when you enter. The apothecary notices your gaze. "She keeps the rats out," he says simply, and the fear down. It's a quiet truth. During plague times, anything that didn't panic was worth keeping around. Cats didn't run screaming. They didn't pray. They didn't flee. They just stayed, eating pests, curling in warm corners, watching you with that familiar face that said, "You're dramatic, but I'll allow it." Here's your odd detail of the night. In a small town in Bohemia, a plague shrine was built with carvings of saints' angels, and at the very base a line of stone cats. The priest claimed they were unofficial protectors placed there in memory of the town's survival. Whether divine or just deadly effective, the cats got a monument. Back outside, the wind picks up. A piece of parchment tumbles by. Someone has scrawled on it, "Avoid the black ones." Their eyes shine with death. It's unclear whether the writer meant cats or crows, but it doesn't matter. Fear doesn't need details. Scholars today know, of course, that the plague was carried by fleas on rats, and that removing cats only worsened the spread. But medieval Europe didn't have microscopes. They had observation rumor and patterns they could half see. And if someone died after a cat sat on their windowsill, well, that was enough for a verdict. In some places, a reversal occurred. When people noticed that houses with cats had fewer deaths, they began treating the cats as protection. Bowls of milk were placed on thresholds. Ribbons tied around tails. One scribe even recorded an offering of tiny fish for the household guardian who brings silence to the walls. You pause now beside a well. A black cat is perched on its edge watching something invisible. It doesn't blink. You don't ask what it sees. 3 cough-softened curiosities before sleep. A London parish in 1349 listed 12 cat executions on suspicion of harboring spirits. No one explained how the spirits fit inside. One Flemish town exempted cats from plague tax. Yes, that was a thing if they lived in bakeries or near wells. Vital infrastructure, evidently. In Milan, cats were painted on doors as a kind of charm. One homeowner had a mural of Saint Sebastian flanked by 2 tuxedo cats. Bold move. The streets are emptying now. Lanterns gutter out. But behind doors, in cellars on rooftops, cats move quietly through the night, their footsteps unnoticed, their presence oddly reassuring. You lie down in a hayloft above the apothecary's shop. The air is still. Below, the tabby cat stretches, yawns, and curls into sleep once more. You close your eyes. You breathe. You listen. And maybe, just maybe, you sleep better knowing she's there. Purring and healing. Powers. You're lying on a creaky straw mattress in a small village infirmary. The ceiling beams sag a little. The walls smell of sage vinegar and whatever passed for hope in a time without antibiotics. Candles flicker in little iron holders, casting shadows that look like saints if you squint and hallucinate just enough. Your ankle is wrapped in linen. Your pride is wrapped in silence. You slipped on cabbage during market day. Again. And nestled beside you, warm and oddly weighty, is a cat. It's not your cat. It might not even belong to the healer. But it's here curled beside your hip, purring steadily like a fuzzy engine humming you back to functionality. Tonight's historical fact: in parts of medieval Europe, cats were believed to have healing powers, especially through their purring. Some healers and folk doctors encouraged the sick to keep a cat nearby, not just for companionship, but for what they genuinely believed was a physical benefit. And shockingly, modern science has kind of backed them up. But let's stay in the past for a moment. You're watching the cat rise, stretch, and pad to the foot of the bed. It curls back into a loaf and begins to purr again. The healer, a middle-aged woman with too many rings and too few teeth, nods at it approvingly. She likes you, she says. That's good. Means the fever's leaving. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. She only lies on the ones who get better. It's both comforting and slightly terrifying. In certain regions, particularly in the British Isles and parts of Central Europe, cats were seen not only as pest control, but as soothing spirits capable of sensing illness, absorbing bad energy, and according to one French herbalist, drawing the chill from the bones with breath like silk. Your odd detail of the night, a 15th century healing manual from Flanders, lists cat warmth as a treatment for joint pain, melancholy, and ill thoughts that arrive before dawn. The prescription: let a calm cat lie across the affected part for at least an hour. If the cat left too soon, tempt it back with sweet milk and gentle humming. Imagine that in today's emergency room triage system. You're now sitting up propped on itchy pillows. The healer hands you a bowl of weak broth and a single boiled turnip. The cat peers into the bowl as if silently judging your dietary progress. A visiting friar passes by and mutters something under his breath. The healer shoos him off. Last week he came back in here with a fever, she says, and the cat wouldn't go near him. Told me all I needed to know. There's something about that purring. Low, steady, vibrating not just your skin, but your bones. You begin to wonder if the cat is helping, or if you're simply believing hard enough that it feels like it. Either way, the ache in your ankle is a little less annoying than it was an hour ago. The draft doesn't feel so cold. Scholars today know that cat purring occurs at frequencies between 25 and 150 hertz, a range that's been shown to promote tissue healing and bone regeneration. Did medieval folk understand the math? No. But did they trust the fuzzy, vibrating miracle loaf at the foot of their bed? Absolutely. 3 soft, cough-sized giggles before you drift. A medieval French noblewoman reportedly owned 7 cats and insisted her ailments were only relieved when at least 3 were purring on her chest at once. Her husband lived in a separate wing. One healer's notes included cat-induced sleep is the best kind and suggested putting a kitten in a swaddled pouch like a hot water bottle. The cat was less enthusiastic. A German poet described his convalescence as 2 parts soup, 1 part nap, and 1 very determined marmalade healer. As the wind picks up outside, the infirmary grows quieter. Other patients stir in their beds, murmuring in half-sleep. The cat shifts slightly and presses against your arm, its purring rising just a touch in volume, as if to say, yes, yes, keep going. You're mending, just fine. You lie back. The linen is scratchy. The broth was terrible. But the cat is warm, and the world, for now, is soft. Sleep well, friend of the furred physician. And if you wake in the middle of the night to find something curled on your chest, don't panic. That's just the medicine working. A cat in the wedding feast. You're seated at a long wooden table, covered in rough linen and wrinkled with the chaos of a half-eaten medieval wedding feast. The room buzzes with the aftermath of dancing and the low hum of guests chewing with the determination of people who've survived 5 winters and are now face to face with roast duck. Candles flicker in iron sconces, the floor is littered with breadcrumbs, and the minstrels are tuning their instruments in a way that suggests they've been paid just enough to stay sober. And sitting, yes, actually seated on a small stool at the end of the table next to the bride's great aunt, is a cat, not skulking beneath the table, not stealing food, just there in full view, like it was on the guest list. Tonight's historical fact: in certain parts of medieval Europe, especially in folk-heavy rural traditions, and among some noble households, it was considered good luck to have a cat present during a wedding, and in some regions, even required. Cats were believed to bring fertility, prosperity, and stability to the new household. You glance toward the newlyweds. The groom is red-faced from too much wine and dancing. The bride is giggling into a goblet, and the cat is delicately grooming one paw with a look that says, "I've seen better receptions." In parts of France and Scotland, the tradition went even further. A cat had to walk between the bride and groom at least once before sunset, or the union would be deemed imbalanced. That's a lot of pressure on a creature who regularly forgets which direction it was walking in. Here's your odd detail of the night. In a noble wedding, recorded in Cornwall around 1420, the family's elderly black cat was carried down the aisle ahead of the bride as a sign of abundance and grace. The cat was apparently unfazed, though the groom's mother was less than thrilled. Records say she tripped over its tail and blamed it for a 4-year bout of bad dreams. You watch now, as the cat at this feast, orange-striped and shaped like a loaf of warm bread, leans in toward a bowl of honey-glazed apples. A guest obligingly offers it a slice of cheese. The cat accepts with dignity. Across the room, someone whispers that this particular feline has attended 7 weddings. All the couples are still married. One of them reportedly owns 3 goats now. Scholars raise an eyebrow at these traditions. Some argue that the cat's presence symbolized domestic harmony, because cats tend to stay close to places that are warm, calm, and stable. Others think it was more superstition than symbolism. If the cat sat close to the bride, it meant she'd bear healthy children. If it avoided the groom, he was hiding something. You lean back full of stew and curiosity. A drunken uncle shouts something about a toast to the whiskered guest, and everyone lifts their goblets toward the cat. The cat flicks its tail, as if slightly annoyed by the attention, and promptly sneezes. A collective "ooh" echoes around the room. It's apparently a very good sign. 3 feasting chuckles for your gentle dreams. A German folktale tells of a wedding where the cat jumped on the bridal cake and fell asleep. The couple reportedly had 12 children and an extra bakery. In Poland, if the cat yawned during the first toast, it meant the marriage would last through any famine. If it licked its nose, someone would get rich. A noble in Burgundy once tried to forbid cats from his daughter's wedding. The cat arrived anyway, sat in his chair, and refused to move. They compromised. The music resumed soft lutes and rhythmic clapping. The candles burn lower, and the cat, ever composed, curls itself atop a velvet cushion clearly meant for someone's elderly relative. No one complains. You rise to leave, stepping quietly past puddles of spilled wine and dozing cousins. The cat watches you go, blinking slowly, like it's logged your presence for future reference. Outside, the air is cool and sweet with the scent of late flowers and distant bonfires. Inside, laughter swells again. A union has begun, and somewhere in that room, a cat is taking partial credit. Sleep, now dreamer of odd rituals. And if you ever find yourself at a wedding where a cat arrives uninvited, just know it might be the oldest guest in the room, and probably the wisest. The black cat crosses the Lord. You're standing on a cobblestone path just outside a manor house so large it's almost insecure about something. The hedges are clipped into unsettling shapes. The windows are tall, narrow, and judging you. Somewhere, a fountain gurgles nervously, like it knows it's being watched. And coming down the path, robes, flapping jewels, jangling, and frown, already locked into position, is the local lord. Tall, stern, utterly convinced the entire kingdom owes him an explanation. He's halfway across the courtyard when it happens. From under a wagon wheel, a shadow slips into the light, a sleek black cat. It walks directly across his path, doesn't pause, doesn't look up, just a smooth, silent glide from one bush to the next. The Lord stops mid-stride, freezes, looks down, looks back at the cat, looks up at the sky like it might offer him a refund. Tonight's historical fact in medieval Europe, the superstition surrounding black cats crossing one's path, wasn't just common, it was often taken very seriously by the nobility. To many, it signaled misfortune, betrayal, or divine warning. And in some households, such an encounter could delay decisions, postpone travel, or on more dramatic days, cancel entire events. The cat's still walking, unbothered, possibly proud. You watch as the Lord hesitates, then turns on his heel and storms back into the manor. "I'll reschedule," he mutters, as if rain were falling from feline paws. In parts of England and the Germanic states, a black cat crossing your path from left to right was considered particularly unlucky. Right to left, slightly better, but only if it didn't stop to look at you directly. If it sat down mid-crossing, that meant the decision was already made by the cat, and you had no say in the matter. Your odd detail of the night in a 15th century etiquette guide for noble households, there's a note buried in the chapter on travel that reads, "Should a black cat bar your road at dawn, return to bed. The sun is not yours today." Which sounds like great advice, frankly, for most Mondays. You're now seated under an awning as rain begins to drizzle from a confused sky. A stable boy nearby offers you a bowl of warm cider. "She's done it again," he says, with a grin, pointing toward the hedge where the cat vanished. "That's the third time this month. We haven't had a tax inspection since." The manor staff, you learn, love the cat. To them, she's not a curse, she's a shield. Every time she crosses the Lord's path, some overambitious disaster is quietly shelved. One cook even baked her a tart. The cat batted it off the windowsill, which was interpreted as a very firm no thank you from the spiritual realm. Scholars debate the origins of the black cat omen. Some argue it evolved from Norse myths, where Freya's chariot was pulled by two black cats, symbols of both magic and mischief. Others suggest it was a reaction against ancient Egyptian reverence flipping sacred into sinister. And still others claim it's just what happens when you combine a fear of the unknown with something that stares at walls at midnight for no reason. Back near the fountain, the cat emerges again. This time, she stretches, luxuriously yawns like a queen, and proceeds to saunter across the kitchen boy's path. He stops, shrugs, and says, "Guess I'll keep baking." The rule, you see, only applies if you believe in it. 3 fateful felinisms before you fade. A Flemish nobleman once claimed a black cat caused his marriage to fall apart. Turns out, the cat had been stealing his letters and sleeping on the reply ink. In Prague, a baron built a separate entrance to his manor just to avoid being crossed by his own black cat. The cat exclusively used that entrance afterward. A Scottish sailor refused to board his ship if the dock cat crossed in front of him. His crew waited 6 hours once while the cat napped in a crate. The rain eases. The sky softens into twilight. The manor quiets behind you as the cat curls up beneath a bench tail, twitching once, then settling into stillness. You close your eyes. The air smells like moss and distant hearth smoke. Somewhere a door creaks. Somewhere else, a plan is rescheduled. And in the middle of it all, a black cat sleeps soundly, blissfully unaware that half the household sees her as a supernatural consultant. Sleep well. And if you ever see a black cat cross your path, just remember, it might not be a warning. It might just be walking home. Cats on the ship deck. You're on the deck of a creaky medieval ship that smells like wet rope old fish and ambitions larger than the hull. The sea heaves beneath your feet like it's trying to remember a song, and the sail overhead flaps like an annoyed bedsheet in the wind. Sailors move about barefoot, muttering prayers to saints you've never heard of, and sitting balanced with uncanny grace on the rail of the stern is a cat, one paw tucked under, tail gently flicking, eyes fixed on the horizon like it's searching for something landlocked, or maybe just a particularly bold seagull. The captain walks by and tips his hat not to you, but to the cat, because on this vessel, the cat is in charge of fate. Tonight's historical fact throughout medieval Europe and well into the age of sail cats were considered essential crew members on ships not only for pest control, but also for their supernatural associations. A cat on board could signal good luck, divine favor, or, if it misbehaved, an omen of very wet doom. You grip the railing and glance toward the forecastle, where two sailors are arguing over whether the cat just sneezed or hissed. One insists that if it sneezed toward the west, it means rain. The other thinks it just didn't like the stew. Either way, the anchor's not coming up until someone consults the first mate, meaning the cat. This particular ship cat, named Salt, naturally has survived 4 voyages, 3 storms, and 1 memorable incident involving a barrel of pickled onions and a now one-eyed cook. Salt is a legend. Salt is a mystery. Salt also refuses to eat anything served in a bowl. There's your first clue. Back on land, cats were linked to magic. On ships, even more so. A calm cat meant calm seas. A cat meowing constantly meant a storm was brewing. If a cat jumped ship before departure, cancel everything and go home. Immediately. In fact, during the 13th and 14th centuries, some ships wouldn't leave port without a cat. Contracts were delayed, voyages rescheduled, and in one notable Venetian case, a crate of oranges was thrown overboard to make room for a cat that had missed boarding. Your odd detail of the night, one Genoese merchant ship kept a painted portrait of its cat Barnaba in the captain's quarters. The real Barnaba had passed peacefully in a barrel, but his image was considered sacred. The ship's log included entries like "cross the channel." Barnaba looked pleased. No leaks today. Sailors believed cats could sense changes in wind smell brewing storms and more fantastically communicate with the sea itself. Some tales even claimed cats could calm the waves by purring or draw lightning if angered. So naturally, everyone treated them with the careful respect usually reserved for temperamental nobles or untested stew. You lean down now, offering Salt a scrap of dried herring. She sniffs it, snorts, and walks away. That's fine. You'll just live with the consequences. Scholars note that cats' sharp senses, especially their ears, and balance do make them eerily good at predicting shifts in pressure and motion, which when combined with sailor superstition and a lack of other entertainment at sea, created a lore where one tail twitch could sink a ship or save it. Here come your 3 seaworthy snickers before you drift off. A Norse legend claims cats could summon favorable winds by chasing their tails counterclockwise. Sailors once made offerings of salted butter to encourage this behavior. One captain kept 2 cats named Port and Starboard. They only ever slept on the correct sides of the ship. When they switched for a week, 3 masts cracked. In a French fishing village, sailors built a tiny cat-sized hammock on every boat. If the cat refused to lie in it, no one went near the water. The sun dips now, casting golden streaks across the waves. The ship creaks, but gently. Salt returns to her post, curling into a perfect spiral nose tucked beneath her tail, the very image of contentment. The crew exhales. So do you. You lie back against a coil of rope, lulled by the rocking of the ship and the occasional creak that sounds suspiciously like someone cursing in Old Breton. Above you, the sails billow. Below you, the ocean breathes. And beside you, a cat dreams of shores it's never seen and storms it will never tell you about. Sleep now, sailor. And if your dreams carry you out to sea, may you find a little black and white guide perched on the rail tail, flicking in approval. The silent jury. You're standing in the village hall, a drafty wood-framed room that smells of beeswax sweat and decisions no one wants to make. Benches creak under the weight of bodies and tension. A magistrate sits at the front with robes too big and eyebrows too judgmental. The accused stands in the center, clutching a torn hat and an even more torn excuse. And sitting on the windowsill, tail twitching rhythmically, is a cat. She's not part of the court. She's not listed in any charter. But everyone glances at her subtly, carefully, because everyone knows the cat is watching. And the cat always knows who's lying. Tonight's historical fact: in many medieval villages, cats, especially older ones, were believed to have the ability to see the truth. This belief crept into everything from informal dispute settlements to full-blown legal trials. Superstitious or not, people paid close attention to what the village cat did during a case. You're now seated in the back corner on a wooden bench that hasn't been level in generations. The accused, Jonas the Tanner, is defending himself against the charge of watering down cowhide glue. He swears he's innocent. The magistrate squints at him. The crowd murmurs. The cat. She yawns. This may not go well for Jonas. In rural courts, particularly in parts of Brittany, the Low Countries, and northern England, the behavior of a cat during a trial could sway opinion. Did it sit near the accused? Good sign. Did it leave the room entirely? Not so much. Did it hiss? Well, you might as well start writing your apology to the Village Cheese Guild. One surviving account from 1386 describes a theft case in which the town's cat leapt onto the thief's shoulder mid-testimony. No one touched the man. He confessed within 2 hours. Was it guilt pressure? Or the fact that a 12-pound tomcat had sunk its claws into his neck? Scholars remain divided. Your odd detail of the night in a Swiss Hamlet court record from the 15th century, a cat named Liesel was referred to as the Velvet Judge. She had attended 15 hearings, during which she reportedly meowed only once. That case was dismissed. No one ever asked why. They just nodded and moved on. Back in your trial, Jonas finishes his defense. The magistrate leans forward. The baker raises a brow. The blacksmith scratches his nose with the air of a man who wishes he'd stayed home. Everyone turns toward the windowsill. The cat licks her paw. A collective inhale. Then, she stands, stretches, and jumps down. She walks to the center of the room, sits directly in front of Jonas, and looks up. The room stills. Someone coughs. The magistrate clears his throat, mutters, "Well, perhaps not guilty." case closed. You follow the cat as she walks away, tail high, like a diplomat leaving a summit she didn't technically attend. She pauses at the exit to sniff a dropped crust of bread. The crowd parts for her. In modern terms, it sounds absurd. But back then, cats were considered witnesses of spiritual weight. They lived among the people, watched silently, and didn't lie. What more could a medieval court ask for 3 quiet giggles before the gavel of sleep falls? A Flemish court once postponed a hearing because their regular court cat was unwell. The case was ruled a mistrial when it returned and stared at both parties in disgust. A Norwegian folk tale tells of a cat that could detect falsehood by walking on the speaker's left foot. The cat, notably, was never wrong and very popular at village picnics. One village scribe wrote in the margin of a legal scroll, "This judgment was confirmed by the watching of Mogan the Just. Tail never lied." Night settles over the hall now. The bench is empty. The magistrate files his papers in a leather satchel that's seen too much. You step out into the chilly night, and behind you, the cat sits once more on the sill, eyes glowing faintly in the firelight, ears perked. Not judging, just remembering. Sleep now, bearer of quiet truths. And if you ever find yourself in doubt, seek the gaze of the one who has seen everything and chosen to nap through half of it anyway. The cat in the Crusader Camp. You're crouched beside a flickering campfire on the edge of a makeshift medieval army camp. The air smells like burnt bread, oiled chainmail, and the lingering dread of too many men sleeping too close with too few baths. Tents stretch across the horizon like wilted mushrooms, and the only music is the occasional clang of steel and a soldier grumbling about blisters. But there's something else here, something softer, stranger. A cat, not a camp rat, not a scruffy dog. A proper striped tabby cat perched atop a stack of supply crates like she's waiting for someone to explain why she hasn't been offered a pillow. The soldiers don't chase her off. In fact, one gives her a piece of salted fish, because everyone here knows she's good luck. Tonight's historical fact during the Crusades, particularly from the 11th to the 13th centuries, cats were not only tolerated in military camps, but sometimes treated as omens, mascots, or even tactical assets. They were seen as signs of divine favor, spirit guardians, or just practical companions who could kill rats and stare unblinkingly at heretics. You're offered a seat by the fire. A knight in dusty surcoat nods toward the cat. "She's been with us since Marseille," he says, poking the embers. "Survived storms, dessert, and Geoffroy's cooking. So, obviously, holy." The other men nod gravely. In several first-hand Crusader Chronicles, cats are mentioned not just as background detail, but as meaningful figures. One squire records in his journal that when the beast visits my tent, I sleep without dreams. Another notes that a cat once sat on the banner of a noble house the night before battle, and that house suffered no injuries the next day. Coincidence, probably. But back then, coincidence was a perfectly acceptable form of theology. Your odd detail of the night in a dusty corner of a Crusader-era outpost in Syria, archaeologists uncovered a tile with an inscription in Latin and Arabic, both naming the small guardian with the golden eyes. The tile had a carving of a cat curled in sleep. The dual language suggests the superstition was shared by both Christian and Muslim soldiers in the region. Because war may divide people, but cats are universal. You sip something warm from a battered cup. It tastes like tea if tea had given up. The cat pads silently across the firelight tail, held high, then disappears into the tent of the company commander. No one follows. Let her check the map, someone mutters. She's better than the scout. And you know what she probably is. Scholars today chalk this behavior up to a mix of desperation and projection. In a war-torn camp full of fear-death and terrible hygiene, a calm, self-assured animal, especially one that doesn't ask for anything, was a powerful comfort. Cats didn't prey. Cats didn't panic. They just existed. Clean, silent, observant. And in a time where people feared divine punishment at every turn, a creature that moved through danger unscathed was nothing short of miraculous. You watch as a group of soldiers rolls dice beside the fire. When the cat walks past, one man picks up his cup and kisses the rim, his personal luck ritual. Another quickly turns his dagger point down in the dirt, a quiet offering of respect. 3 battlefield chuckles before slumber takes the hill. A Templar commander reportedly allowed one cat to sleep on his standard before every battle. The one time it refused, he canceled the attack. His men thought him mad until a landslide wiped out the path they would have taken. A cook in Antioch claimed his stew only tasted good if the cat was nearby while it boiled. The soldiers agreed. The cat refused to negotiate her schedule. One knight wrote home to his sister, asking for a second cat if possible, for moral support and flea control. The letter somehow survived. So did the night. The camp grows quieter now. Fires dim. Armor clinks as men shift in uneasy sleep. And from the top of a pile of folded banners, the cat stares out over the fields like a general contemplating the stars. You lie back on a bedroll that's more lumps than cushion. The air is cool. Your eyelids are heavy. And just before sleep takes you, you hear the cat purr, a soft, unshaken hum amidst a world of turmoil. Sleep now, wanderer of weary armies. And if you dream of battle tonight, may there always be a quiet pawstep beside you, reminding you that not all is chaos. Some of it is just whiskers. Cat bones in the wall. You're standing in the crumbling remains of a medieval cottage, the kind that's been swallowed by ivy and time. The hearth is blackened. The wooden beams sag like they're tired of holding secrets, and the wind slips through broken windows with a voice like distant memory. The archaeologist beside you dusts something off with a delicate brush. Not treasure, not coins, bones. Small, curled unmistakably feline. Tonight's historical fact across medieval Europe, especially in England, France, and parts of Scandinavia, cat remains have been found deliberately sealed inside the walls of homes, barns, and even churches, not hidden out of guilt, not buried with honor, but placed carefully, as a charm, a protection. You're handed a lamp and led deeper into the ruins. The scent of damp stone and ancient dust fills your nose. On the north wall, behind where a wooden lintel once stood, is a niche. Just big enough for a curled-up cat, just deep enough to hide it from plain sight, but not from time. To the medieval mind, this wasn't gruesome. It was necessary. You see, people believed that placing a cat, often deceased within the walls of a building, could ward off evil, protect from fire, or even repel plague. The idea was that the spirit of the animal, especially a creature so closely tied to the liminal spaces of life and death, would stand watch. Forever. It wasn't just cats. Shoes were sometimes placed in chimneys, bones of chickens, or toads under floorboards. But cats were different. Cats were guardians, and sometimes sacrifices. Your odd detail of the night in Norfolk, England, a mummified cat was found bricked behind the fireplace of a Tudor cottage. Tests dated it to the late 14th century. It had been positioned upright, facing outward as if on duty. The home had survived 3 fires. Coincidence? The local museum's label says only watch cat. You crouch now beside the wall and imagine the mason centuries ago placing the creature inside with quiet reverence. A whispered blessing, a few sprigs of dried sage, a stone pressed gently into place. No records explain why it had to be a cat, but folklore hints that cats could sense spiritual intrusion, that their presence could confuse malevolent forces. A ghost might hesitate, a curse might turn, a demon might be delayed. Scholars debate the ethics and symbolism. Was it ritualistic? Was it cruel? Or was it an act of faith in a creature whose very existence blurred the line between everyday and enchanted? You stand brushing dust from your knees. The wind stirs again. In the quiet, the ruined cottage doesn't feel empty. It feels guarded. 3 spooky snickers before your eyelids start to blink slower. A 15th century superstition claimed that if you heard meowing in a house with no visible cat, it meant a watch cat was still present in spirit. Or you just forgot to check the pantry. One French noble had 3 cats placed in the foundation of his hunting lodge for luck protection and mystical rodent discouragement. A Wiltshire builder once refused to construct a barn without a cat sealed into the wall. The farmer said no. The barn collapsed in a windstorm 6 months later. The builder said, "Told you." Now the stars shine down through the broken roof. The walls hum with a silence that isn't quite empty. You find a seat on a fallen beam and close your eyes. Somewhere in the darkness, you feel the weight of centuries and something else soft, present, protective. Sleep now in the care of old sentinels. And if you hear a faint purring from behind the wall, don't be afraid. That's just the cat still keeping watch. The Abbey's Cat Choir. You're walking through the cloisters of an old stone abbey in early morning. The sky is the soft gray of unfinished parchment, and the world smells like dew moss and freshly turned pages. Birds chirp in half-hearted harmony. Somewhere a bell tolls a little too enthusiastically for this hour, and from the chapel, just barely audible over the echo of sandals on flagstones, comes a sound, a meow, followed by another, then a third. Welcome to the Abbey of St. Corentin, home of the only recorded incident of a feline chorus joining morning prayers on such a consistent basis that it was mentioned in the monastery's logbooks for 3 decades. Tonight's, or rather this morning's historical fact, in multiple monastic records from the 13th and 14th centuries, cats were observed joining in during chanted prayers, particularly at the quieter services like matins or compline. Some monks claimed they sang. Others said they wailed. All agreed they were consistent. You peek into the chapel. It's quiet. 7 monks are seated in align robes draped over knees, mouths moving in unison. Gregorian chant swells gently under the vaulted ceiling, and from the back pew, perched with all the solemnity of a novice in deep contemplation, sits a long-haired cat. Her name, according to the records, is Beatrix. She meows on the 3rd amen. No one flinches. You take a seat on a bench, careful not to make the wood creak too loudly. Another cat pads in this one gray round, and entirely unimpressed by the divine. He curls beside a monk's sandal and begins grooming, completely unbothered by the celestial goings-on. In one famous case, from an abbey in Mainz, monks reportedly began adjusting their chanting tempo to accommodate the timing of a particularly vocal cat named Hugo. When Hugo passed, the abbot wrote, "Our rhythm is now irregular, our prayers less certain. Hugo, return in dreams." Your odd detail of the night in a Benedictine scriptorium, one monk copied psalms for years with a cat seated at his feet. When the cat began to meow, along with the noonday hymn, the monk added a marginal note. Her voice rises like incense, off-key but rising. The note survives. So does a faint ink paw print 2 lines down. Back in the chapel, the monks shift to a deeper tone, something Latin and full of sibilance. Beatrix stands stretches with theatrical effort and lets out a yawn-meow hybrid that echoes down the stone hallway like a feline organ chord. You try not to laugh. A monk beside you smiles ever so slightly. Why did they allow this? Because in monastic life, so strict, so controlled, the presence of something unpredictable, soft, and quietly ridiculous was welcome. Cats brought warmth to cold cloisters, purring to stone silence, life to ritual, and sometimes, yes, music to liturgy. Some scholars argue the cats were tolerated for pest control. Others suggest the monks saw them as symbols of solitude and reflection. Still others think the monks were simply lonely, and a furry choir was better than no choir at all. One monk's commentary describes his abbey's cats as creatures most mysterious, given neither to confession nor sin, yet always present for the divine hour. 3 harmonious chuckles before your soul begins to drift. A Carmelite friar once tried to teach a cat to sit on cue during hymns. The cat succeeded only during meals. Is a small Flemish abbey. Cats were listed as non-salaried observers of Compline. One refused to observe anything and was dubbed Brother Loaf. A traveling bishop complained that he could not sleep in the abbey guest house due to cat hymns in the courtyard. The monks wrote back, "The cats say, Amen." The chanting winds down. Candles flicker. One of the cats leaps onto a sun-warmed sill and flops over with complete disregard for holiness. The monks file out quietly, leaving the choir of tails and whiskers to hold their vigil. You stay a little longer, because this moment, this quiet blend of fur and faith feels timeless. Sleep now in the echoes of songs, never meant for charts. And if you hear a meow in your dreams tonight, don't worry. It's just Beatrix hitting her solo. Pilgrim with a pouch of kibble. You're trudging up a dusty hillside trail, sandals worn thin knees full of quiet complaints, and a satchel that squeaks every time you shift it. The air smells like time sweat, and the overwhelming humility of someone who's realized this pilgrimage was not, in fact, a leisurely countryside stroll. Around you, pilgrims pass by, muttering prayers, counting beads, or wheezing dramatically. But the most curious figure on this road isn't praying or singing or limping. It's purring. A man up ahead, bearded, sunburned, and vaguely shaped like a barrel, is leading a small tabby cat on a thin rope. The cat walks with the poise of a duchess and the attitude of someone who's never heard of blisters. Strapped to the man's hip is a tiny pouch. Yes, it's kibble. Tonight's historical fact. During the height of medieval pilgrimage culture, some travelers brought cats with them, not just for companionship, but for protection, pest control, spiritual symbolism, and occasionally emotional support, disguised as practicality. In a world where roads were dangerous and inns were unpredictable, a cat was both a comfort and a tool. You're close enough now to hear the man speaking gently to his feline companion. Come now, Agnes. We'll rest at the shrine. Agnes yawns, steps over a puddle without touching it, and keeps walking, like this entire journey was her idea. In several surviving accounts of pilgrimages, especially along the Camino de Santiago, travelers mention bringing animals with them. Dogs were common, sure, but cats were for the wise. They ate what you couldn't, slept without complaint, warned you of rodent snakes or spiritual unease depending on the cat and your level of personal drama. Your odd detail of the night. A 14th century English pilgrim named Maud wrote in her journal that her cat Benedicta saved her from theft twice, once by yowling at a suspicious monk, and once by biting a thief who tried to steal her shoes while she slept. Maud described Benedicta as small, sharp, and untroubled by authority. You pause now at a roadside shrine where candles flicker in the shade. The cat Agnes circles the base of the stone and sits down facing sleepTail, curled like punctuation. A woman nearby crosses herself and whispers, "The cat knows the hour." To her that wasn't strange, it was reassuring. Pilgrims often assign spiritual significance to their cats. A calm cat meant your soul was on the right path. A restless cat, better pray harder. If the cat refused to enter a shrine, perhaps it sensed false relics. Or maybe it just didn't like that spot. Who's to say? Scholars suggest that bringing a cat on pilgrimage blurred the line between pet and relic. In a world filled with sacred items, bones, cloth, scraps, holy water, why not a breathing companion who could chase rats and judge you in equal measure? You sip from a water skin and sit beside the man with the cat. He offers you a fig. The cat offers you a blink. He explains that she's been with him since Rouen, slept beside him during rain, sat on his chest when he was feverish, hissed at a guard in Toulouse. The guard let them pass. He doesn't call her lucky. He just calls her right. 3 paw-printed puns before your legs give up for the night. A medieval guidebook to Spanish pilgrimage sites includes a note. If thou travelest with a cat, remember to share thy fish and prayers in equal measure. In southern France, it was said that a cat crossing thy path on pilgrimage was a blessing, but only if it didn't trip you. One traveler painted his cat's paw prints on his walking staff, claiming they lighten the load. No one argued. The sun begins to dip low, casting warm gold across the hillside. The shrine glows faintly. The cat stretches, then climbs into the man's lap like a returning queen. You settle into the grass backpack, under your head shoes unlaced. Pilgrimage is exhausting, yes, but beside you, the quiet breathing of a creature who's never once questioned your pace, your path, or your past feels holy. Sleep now, traveler of tangled trails. And if you walk in dreams tonight, may a small, patient paw lead you to gentler ground. When the cat wore a crown, you're in the great hall of a castle that smells like roasted game-polished stone, and the unmistakable air of people pretending they aren't just waiting for dessert. The feast is in full swing, nobles leaning too far into their wine minstrels, strumming increasingly off-key tunes, and jesters juggling things that really shouldn't be juggled indoors. And on the high table, just beside the Lord's golden goblet, is a cat. Not just sitting, not just napping, wearing a crown. It's small, slightly crooked, possibly made from pastry dough and decorative herbs, but it is undeniably a crown, and the cat is undeniably wearing it better than the Duke. Tonight's historical fact and scattered accounts from noble households, especially during feast days, festivals and coronation banquets, cats were occasionally crowned or ceremonially honored as symbols of grace, wisdom, or simple absurdity. In some cases, it was tradition. In others, a dare gone too far. You're seated a few benches down, watching the scene unfold with cautious amusement. The lord of the manor, red-faced and half-laughing, raises his cup and declares, "To Sir Muse, defender of the pantry scourge of all mice and most punctual dinner guest." The hall erupts in laughter and applause. The cat flicks an ear. Nothing else. In some noble households, cats held unofficial titles. Guardian of the larder countess, of the cushion knight, of the kitchen shadows. These weren't jokes, or rather, they were but affectionate ones. To people who lived in a world of ceremony formality and rigid hierarchy, honoring the household cat was both a break from seriousness and a surprising act of reverence. Your odd detail of the night in a 15th century record from a Hungarian estate, a black and white cat named Mathilde, was crowned every year on the feast of St. Gertrude. The household servants would place a garland of violets on her head and carry her through the kitchen while chanting, "Long live she who fears no broom." She reportedly bit only 2 of them. You watch as a servant tiptoes forward, now offering the crowned cat a sliver of smoked salmon atop a silver dish. She leans forward, sniffs it, then swipes it delicately onto the floor. A squire immediately offers his napkin. She ignores him. The crowd adores her. The priest nearby murmurs, "This is bordering on idolatry." The steward replies, "Only if she starts answering prayers." Scholars often note the strange duality cats held in noble courts, sacred and ridiculous, adored and feared. They were allowed into rooms where some humans weren't. They slept on embroidered cushions. They occasionally walked across royal maps, and no one dared move them. Because there's something about a cat that transcends rules, even when you give it a crown. 3 final regal giggles before the curtain closes. One baron in Brittany had a portrait commissioned of his favorite cat crowned, robed, and seated on a throne of sausages. It hung in the dining hall for 30 years. In Venice, a patrician's will included a clause that his cat Padrino be honored annually with a fish-shaped cake and a procession. The cat never attended. A Welsh lord attempted to knight his cat. The cat walked away mid-ceremony. The lord called it a test of humility. The feast begins to fade into warmth and wine-scented silence. Nobles yawn into goblets. Firelight dances across long tables. The crowned cat Sir Muse stretches once, hops down from the dais, and disappears under the tablecloth like royalty, retreating to her palace of chair legs and dropped breadcrumbs. You lean back, full, tired, soothed. Because in this final foolish moment, when the rules bent for a creature who cared for none of them, you saw something that felt truer than all the titles in the hall. Dignity doesn't always need permission. Sometimes it just needs whiskers. Sleep now, dreamer of crowned companions. And if you wake in the middle of the night with the sense that someone noble is watching you from the windowsill, offer them the spot by the fire. They've earned